And
hello to the stream.
I'm not seeing us on. Oh.
Yeah, we are live. I can see myself.
Oh, no, we are. It's my browser was being slow.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. As per usual, we have the typical awkward, are we live? Oh God, are we live moment.
Yes, one day we'll get that, so we do it properly.
One day we'll get it. Welcome to Learn Data Persistence 101 with Spring Boot and MySQL. My name is Celeste. I'll be running today's workshop. Sébastien is the third person on the stream. Sebastian's going to be my co-host. And Tibbs, who you see in the middle here, is going to be handling the chat and making sure everybody's questions get answered and that we all have a wonderful time.
I will disappear almost instantly because you don't need to see me. I probably don't need to hear me.
All right, Tibbs. But Tibbs is still around, just so you know. Tibbs, I'm just going to mute your mic in StreamYard, just FYI. Basic housekeeping. This is recorded, so I wouldn't do or say anything that you wouldn't want to live on a recording on the internet. Please treat each other with kindness and happiness and joy. The other thing that I'll mention is Sébastien is coming off of our live event in London, Aiven Live, that happened yesterday, and as such is in a hotel room today with slightly spotty internet, so he unfortunately may drop out, but we'll do our best here, okay, everybody? Yeah, so let's kind of just give people another minute or two to join, and if you have time, let us know where you're at in the world. Sebi, how was Aiven Live? What did we talk about? What did we do?
Aiven Live. So Aiven Live was yesterday the first event by Aiven. And it was really great. We had in the morning more like keynotes and panel discussions. And in the afternoon, we had more technical sessions like what is data capture. We had some Terraform. And it was really great because there were a lot of breaks. And during the breaks, we could really discuss with people, do some demos. I was there with my laptop. Tibbs was there with his laptop. And we did a lot of demos. Discussion. So no, I got a lot of good feedback from the attendees saying, hey, one told me it was the first time in my life that I was engaged during the whole session because it was so interesting.
Nice.
Yeah. And another one is he said, I will create my Aiven account tonight and play with it because it's so awesome. So
nice. So just as an FYI, everybody, just a little bit about Aiven, a little bit about Sebi and myself, because I realized I forgot to introduce us. So Sebi, myself, and Tibbs, who is now managing the chat, are all a part of Aiven's developer relations team. Sebi is a developer advocate, and Tibbs and I are, I think, officially, as of now, developer educators, though we'll see how that goes in the future. Aiven runs workshops every Wednesday around all things data, databases, streaming, and more, because Aiven is an open source data platform, as we like to say, for everyone, where you can deploy and manage things like MySQL, PostgreSQL, Redis, etc., etc., etc. Okay, I'm going to say let's get this show on the road, and let's talk about Data Persistence 101. So what we're going to learn today, we're going to go through a super duper quick overview of Hibernate/JPA, or the Java Persistence API. We're going to go through a super duper quick overview of Spring Boot and the Spring Boot framework. We're going to create a MySQL service using Aiven. Then we're going to build an application to manage Sébastien's cats. We'll see how far along we get in that, okay? Okay, so let's talk about data persistence and what we mean when we say data persistence. The easiest way to think about data persistence is the idea that ultimately you probably want to store your application's data in a database. So this is a pretty like standard diagram of how to create any application. You have a presentation layer or a client, and that's like the actual application that somebody's using. You have an application tier, or sort of your server or your back end, if you will. And that's really what stores all of the business logic, all of the objects, all of the things we're actually manipulating when we create an application. And then typically you have a data tier, which lives behind the application, where you actually store data for all the people using your application. And that's really what we mean when we talk about data persistence, is at some point you want to put something in a database so that you have it around, so that you can retrieve it at a later time or in a different session or in some other way. So let's talk about how that works in Java. So Java has this lovely idea of the JDBC, or the Java Database Connectivity framework. It's basically a driver or a package that you use in addition to your application that allows Java applications to connect to different kinds of databases like MySQL, Oracle Database, or PostgreSQL. The reason for this is that databases are kind of complicated to connect to. They're all a little bit fussy, for lack of a better word. And so the JDBC is a way of abstracting away the fussiness and letting you connect in a fairly consistent manner to different kinds of databases. So the JDBC is driver-based, as we just mentioned. It provides data access. The core components of this are the idea of a connection, which stores kind of your host name, your username, your passwords, what database table we're connecting to, etc. A statement, which is basically a SQL query, or like, how do we actually, what do we actually want to do against the database? And a result set, which is if you're querying a database trying to get data out of it, the result set is the data that you get out of it, and it is packaged in a kind of a nice little object. So let's look at this, how it actually works in code. So typically when you're using the JDBC, the first thing you do, like I mentioned, is create a connection object. And you'll notice that the connection object it wants a URL, a user, and a password. Super typical. The SQL query, the prepared statement, or a statement, again, it's just a SQL query in most cases. In some cases, it's a little bit different, but think about it that way. And again, the result set is when we send this query to the server, what do we get back? And typically we're getting back multiple rows of a database. So the way that we want to process that in Java is we want to throw it into a loop, parse out all the individual objects, and when we're done, close off everything, and the usual catch our errors. Now, herein lies the rub. When you develop a Java application, because Java is an object-oriented programming language and it cares very much about being an object-oriented programming language, you end up with a whole bunch of these different sort of domain objects in any application that you create. And those domain objects have relationships to one another. And that becomes really, really difficult to map and understand in a consistent way, particularly when you're talking about a database, because the database table may not map to the way that your objects are set up. A really classic example of this is if you have a customer object and the customer has a name and they have a phone number and they have an address that you need to store later because it's useful. You may have to use the address in one location and the customer's name in a different location and their phone number in a different location. But from a database perspective, it makes sense to store all of those things together so that you can protect your customer's information, right? So we have a bit of a problem where our Java application won't always match up nicely with the way that our database is laid out for perfectly logical reasons. And that's where the idea of an ORM, or Object Relational Mapping, comes into play. So an ORM is basically, in Java, it's usually implemented as like a package or a framework. And it's basically a way of constructing classes that their sole role is to model how things are stored in the underlying database. And that allows us to access and store things in a consistent manner from the database. And it also kind of prevents corruption when we're writing to the database because we're always going through the ORM. So how do ORMs work in Java? Java is a super duper mature framework at this point, or programming language. And as a result, it has a whole bunch of different ORM implementations because Java's been around forever. The one you've probably heard of is the Hibernate framework, but MyBaptiste, TopLink, Eclipse Link all exist as well. All of these implement what's called the JPA, or the Java Persistence API. This is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sebi, this is a part of Java's sort of like core set of APIs.
Yes.
And it's basically, it's a very typical Java implementation in that it provides a bunch of interfaces of methods that you must implement if you are Hibernate or MyBaptiste, et cetera, so that everybody is providing connections to backend frameworks in a somewhat consistent manner.
Yeah, that's it. It's a specification. That's how Java like to work, you know, with SRs and stuff like that. And yeah. So if you're GPA compliant, doesn't matter the implementation behind. That's why we have Hibernate, Eclipse Link, TopLink. It's all abstracted back interfaces. So you could also swap from an implementation to another, and it should still work.
It should still work, yeah. Famous last words, but okay. So what does the JPA do? I would strongly recommend taking a look at the JPA's actual documentation. It is a fairly well-documented part of the Java library, because at some point, like we just mentioned, you're probably going to want to store your data in a database. The JPA, I would say, does like three main things. One is it provides a set of annotations, and the annotations do two things. They describe the role of something in an ORM, whether it's an entity or whatnot, and it sort of describes relationships and ways of interacting with different entities. So we'll go into these in a little bit more detail. The third layer, and this was persistent object management, was my phrasing of it, but I don't think this is like a super accurate way of describing what the entity manager does. But basically, the core object that the JPA really cares about is this idea of an entity. And an entity is something that you might want to store in your database. Typically, you map entities to specific classes in Java. And the entity manager provides a bunch of functionality around entities in making sure that they get persisted and stored in a particular way. The third thing that the JPA does is it provides querying through JPQL. JPQL is a query language that is intentionally very similar to SQL. But instead of operating on sort of rows and columns in a database, the JPQL allows you to query against Java objects. So it's a little bit more Java native in that regard. But really, these are the key components of setting up anything to persist in a database in a consistent fashion. Okay, so we're going to use the JPA through a framework called Spring Boot, and specifically the Spring data component of the Spring framework. Spring is a very complicated topic in the world of Java. It is probably the biggest and most robust Java development framework. And what it really does is it allows you to do application development of all sorts. Spring Boot is probably one of its most popular components, and the Spring framework has a number of different components. It's really big. Spring Boot allows you to do sort of rapid application development, and the thing it does really well is it lets you do RESTful applications really quickly. The Spring data component is where we're going to kind of get our JPA implementation from. And again, that is really around letting you kind of talk to data services. It's kind of too complicated a topic to to go more into detail on that. I mean, I don't know. Do you have anything you'd add, Sebi?
Oh yeah, no. As you said, it's one of the most popular Java framework, and if you want to build a Java app and you are a new Java developer, Spring Boot is for sure a good option. There's also Quarkus, but we will I won't start the debate here. But yeah, you will find a ton of resources online about Spring Boot, and just give it a try. It's they really focus also on developer experience. That's also something that changed if you compare that with Java Enterprise, which was a bit more. Well, the learning curve is a bit more complicated. Here with Spring Boot, yeah, within 10 minutes or within an hour, like we will see in this workshop, you will have a running app. So
yeah. And I sort of think that like the Java ecosystem is probably about 25 years old at this point. And I think there are a lot of people who say like, oh, like there's other cooler, more things to do. But I think learning Java and specifically learning the Spring framework, or at least some components of the Spring framework, like set you up for success in the rest of your computing career because they're so common. Like I want to say probably half the companies that I've worked at have used Java and have used Spring specifically. So like understanding and learning a little bit about the Spring framework is like really foundational in my opinion. And the Spring framework was so influential that it influenced other application frameworks and other languages. So it's a very, very valuable thing to know in my opinion. Okay. Before we move on, do we have any questions from the audience?
No, doesn't look like. I'm
okay.
Monitoring the chat there. No.
Okay, sounds good. So let's move on. Let's actually make some stuff. As we mentioned, we're going to be creating a MySQL service using Aiven, which is the company that both of us work for. Aiven is a data platform for all of your cloud data needs. You can do event streaming, event processing, relational databases, Redis, like a key value database, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can do these on all of the popular clouds that are available these days. And you can do like really, really quick one-click integrations to tools like Datadog and Prometheus and more. So it's a super, super handy application. And in addition to being super, super handy and super, super cool, it is also provides a really, really helpful free tier, which we'll talk about in a second. But let's dive into it. So head over to the GitHub repository. Which is over here, and I'll let Tibbs drop the link in the chat to that. And the first thing I'm going to have you all do is open the Gitpod link. So come here. Open the link in a new tab. You can't see my right-click menu, but that's what I'm doing. And come over here. If it's your first time opening Gitpod, GitHub is going to ask you for authorization. Give Gitpod authorization. You will be totally fine. And aside from that, accepting the default settings is going to be totally okay. The workspace does take a minute or two to open. So let this run in the background while we move on to the next step, which is creating a Aiven for MySQL service. And Tibbs is going to pop that link both on the screen and in the chat for you. So if you do sign up, I would highly, highly recommend using this sign up link. So Aiven does provide a free tier. We will allow you to run a free MySQL database, which is a super, super awesome thing that we do. But it is pretty like low in terms of the kind of traffic and like stuff you can store. Using the sign up link will get you a slightly higher limit and a slightly longer trial. So you should absolutely do that. And I'll just take you through that right now. Of course, it doesn't let me do that because I'm already logged in on a different account. But follow the link, go through the sign up options. It'll ask you to kind of click. It'll send you an email to confirm. And when you're ready, we'll be on the services page. And I'll just give people a minute or two to catch up. I'll take a drink of water while we do that. So I noticed we've got a couple more attendees, which is awesome. Lovely to see you. For the people who just joined, we are about to create a MySQL service using Aiven. And if you check the chat, you should find a sign-up link for Aiven that will get you like a super duper nice free tier version of Aiven. And you'll also find a link to the repository that will be following along for this server. But if for whatever you missed, if you missed those for whatever reason, we will come back to them at a later date. Okay. So hopefully everybody signed up and logged into Aiven now. Let's create a free MySQL service. So we don't want to pay $290 USD right now. So we're going to create a free plan. Our free plans are at this moment in time available on DigitalOcean only, just as an FYI. That's actually really important to note because DigitalOcean has some very specific requirements around its MySQL databases that we will get into in a minute. So I'm going to create a DigitalOcean instance in Amsterdam. Actually, you know what? I'm in Germany. I'll create it in Frankfurt. No, I won't. I like Amsterdam a lot more than I like Frankfurt as a city. As Sebi knows, I have a lot of like complaints about Frankfurt Airport. So I'm going to go with my personal preferences here. Let's give our MySQL database a useful name. I'm going to call mine data persistence because that's easy for me. And when we're ready, we're going to go and create a new service. So you'll notice that our service is rebuilding over here. That just means it's kind of being deployed. So for a minute, do I want to secure this connection? We're okay for now.
Yeah, you can.
If you're doing something in production, you should probably go through the secure connection step, but for our purposes, we're okay. Skip this step. We are, just as an FYI, we're not migrating anything, so you can just finish setup at this point. Keep this screen up. We're going to come back to this in a second to do some copy and pasting. But we're going to head back to our Git pod deployment that we loaded up earlier. And let's notice a few things. We've got a bunch of stuff going on in our terminal. When we launch Git pod, it will automatically build the project for us, which is very nice, which means that we've gone through the build process, and that's what the output you're seeing is. We have a few sort of like pop-ups and errors. Don't worry too much about that for now. Yeah. We'll address those as we go through the tutorial. I'm just going to say no to this one. And really quickly, you don't have to do this step, but I'm doing it for the happiness of all involved. I'm just making my font bigger so that's a little bit more readable for everybody watching the live stream. Okay.
And for those who knows Maven, you probably see what happened here was a Maven build. So
yeah,
all the internet was downloaded there for you in the cloud because
so
locally.
If you've never used Gitpod before, that's basically what it does. It's an IDE in your browser. If you're following along using the repository, you can also build these things locally. You will need to install Java, which can take like a minute. Gitpod for our purposes is just really, really handy because it's an all-in-one solution. So, okay. This is a pretty typical Java project structure in that it has an SRC or a source folder, main, and test. We don't care about the test folder. We're only going to be in the main folder for the purposes of this tutorial. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into main and resources. We're going to open application.properties. This is a fairly typical way of storing one's like connection data in Java applications. And I mentioned that we were going to do some copy and paste. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to replace my host with the host name here. Just a copy and a paste.
Yeah.
Next, we're going to come to my port with the port. And I'm going to copy my password. And I'm very aware that I'm doing this on a live stream. And for the purposes of this recording, I'm just going to say this database will be deleted immediately after this tutorial. So there's no point really. And for those who are watching the stream, please be kind to me. Okay, so we have our connection data. However, you'll notice that we have this /cats at the very end of our host URL. When we have anything more than just like the host name, what that means is we're trying to get to a specific table in a database. However, we have not created this table yet. So that's the next thing we have to do. So I'm going to come back to the Aiven UI. Our database should be done building by this point. Let's just hit refresh. Oh, not quite. But that's okay. Because we can still come over to the databases tab here, create database, and we're going to create cats because
yeah, and that's because he's not yet. Sometimes it works,
sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so while we're waiting for this to rebuild, do we have any questions in the chat?
No, we don't have any question. I asked people, but people are really shy today. Let us know if you managed to create your MySQL service, if your GitHub workspace is running. Don't be shy. Really.
I mean, Sebi, do you have any questions for me?
No, it's really clear. And one question. You went to presentation mode. Is that to make the in GitHub?
Yeah, so that's actually just a profile that I have set up in GitPod, and the only thing the profile does is make the font bigger.
That's pretty useful. Maybe people have questions about the last line in this property, which is commented out. You could.
What does this do, Sebi?
Yeah, that will print out the SQL that JPA, so Hibernate, will generate against the database. So that's really useful for when you're in development mode. Okay, please in production disable that because it's not the kind of log that you need. But I really like it because it shows a bit the magic of Hibernate. When you will do a persist method, it will show you really the insert statement in your log file. So it can be really useful to debug or stuff like that. So.
I mean, let's uncomment it then for the sake of this tutorial. Okay, are we done yet, Aiven? Oh dear, this is taking a bit of a while. Okay.
Okay. But...
we're gonna have to come back to that then, and let's just sort of move on for now. And give me just a second here to pull up my instructions so I remember what we're doing. Okay.
Well, so what you do is create the entity.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Explain the code from that. And by the time we explain the code, I'm sure the service
yeah. So apologies for that. It does take a minute every now and then. But the advantage of using something like Aiven, even though it does take a minute to load for some databases sometimes, it's not usually this slow, is that we kind of manage all the difficult and annoying and hard pieces of managing a database for you. So for example, a part of the reason it's taking a minute to generate is because we're setting up backup services for you. And we're doing things like managing rollbacks and managing availability across different regions, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what's happening in the background while that rebuilds, just as an FYI. But as Sebi mentioned, let's talk about building our first entity. So as we mentioned before, the way that JPA works is it cares about things that we want to persist to the database. And the base unit of anything you can persist to the database is an entity. Entities are typically applied at the class level. And they're typically mapped to like the objects that we're creating and we're manipulating in our Java application. So in this case, the object we care about is cats. For those of you who don't know, Sebi has many, many cats in a very, very beautiful house.
Yeah, 5 cats.
In in the south of France. And because Sebi travels so much for work, he needs a database to keep track of his cats. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a file called cat.java in a /model directory. So, and sorry, I'm just going to double check the location of that. Java IO Aiven. Okay, Java. So we're in Java IO Aiven right now /data workshop. We're going to create a new folder called.
Oh, no, be careful. It's in from here. Yes, it's from here.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Sebi. So model is going to store
the entities.
The classes that we're sort of creating entities around. So let's start with cat. We're going to copy this entire code sample, and then I'm going to kind of explain it to you. So first things first, we have a couple of import statements that are going to go unused until we get a little bit further along in the tutorial, and that's totally okay. The compiler, if you're following along, particularly in your own IDE, you might get a couple of like compiler warnings saying like, hey, this entity is unused. We know it's not a good practice, but it makes me feel better, so that's how I'm doing it. Okay, so when you use Spring, the first thing you'll notice is that everything has a bunch of these annotations. Annotations are a feature in Java, and that Spring uses very, very heavily to do something called dependency injection. Dependency injection is, I liked the way that Sebi explained it in his last workshop. It's the Hollywood principle of don't call us, we'll call you. And what that basically says is, give me the things that I need when I need them. We're not going to load them in advance. We're going to load them when something has compiled and when we know we're actually going to use it. So that's one thing that annotations do. The other thing that annotations do, for example, this at entity annotation, is it indicates to Spring and to the compiler that this is something of a particular sort that has some kind of methods surrounding it. So within cat, we have an ID, we have a name, we have an age, and we have getters and setters for all of those entities. So let's kind of come back up here to ID. So the ID gets the ID annotation, which says give this thing a unique ID every single time we create one of them. We need that for the database. Very specifically because DigitalOcean databases for MySQL require primary keys. If you create a DigitalOcean database that does not have primary keys for some reason, you'll run into a bunch of errors. It's also just a good practice in general when working with data to have primary keys and to have everything have a unique ID. Yeah. There are edge cases where that might not be the case, but we're not going to get into that today. So the next thing you'll notice is this generated value annotation. And the generated value annotation is always used in pair with the ID annotation because what it does is tell Java how you want to generate this ID. So there's a bunch of different types of ways you can do this. Generation type .identity means let the database take care of it. When we put something into the database, let the database assign an ID. And typically what the database will do in that sense is it'll just go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down. So that's really what we need to know about cat, unless there's anything I'm missing, Sebi.
No. It's what you could do if you move your cursor one to the left and you do Control space, you can see all the different
That didn't work the way that I thought it would. Sorry. It's just really, that didn't work. I understand what you're trying to get to.
The
you want the auto
just to look to show the different options, you know.
So the reason that didn't work is because I have a Japanese keyboard installed on.
Ooh, okay. Oh.
Yeah, it's not working. Okay, that didn't work the way we thought it would. Some people, like Sebi, have autocomplete enabled on their on their pod instances, but Celeste doesn't.
Yeah, and be careful, you did a typo on identity here. So,
however, Tibbs has very helpfully dropped links to the generated value type documentation, so you can read that at your leisure. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, but realistically, those ways fall into two different categories. Either one, let the database do it somehow, or two, I want to do it somehow.
Yeah,
that's all that really matters. Okay, speaking of database.
Yeah, speaking of database.
Maybe we're done rebuilding now? Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. That's
a little concerning.
A little concerning, exactly. Do you have any other MySQL database running on your own account right now that we could
No, and I'm really wondering if I maybe just want to delete it and start again at this point. This is actually unusual.
Yeah, or I can pass you in the private chats some connection strings to my MySQL.
Yeah, you know what? Let's do that. Thank you.
Yeah?
So,
okay.
Sorry, everybody. We're troubleshooting in real time here. Yeah, that doesn't normally happen, but I was actually running through this last night, and I was having trouble with some of the other services, so I wonder if there's a bit of downtime. Okay.
Okay, let's me...
I mean, this is appropriate, though, because we're going to store Sebi's cats in Sebi's database. So.
Yeah. And again, be kind with my database.
Yeah, be kind to Sebi's database. Oh, that's not what we want to copy and paste.
And that's all you need, I think. Yeah, and also the port is different. Yeah.
Okay, and do you have the cats table already created?
And I've created the cats table.
Thank you. Oh. Okay. Okay. So that should work now.
Yeah. Hopefully.
And hopefully. So just as an FYI, what we're going to do is we're going to come down into the terminal over here. We're going to Control-C to stop the server.
Oh, no, it's not running. Don't worry.
For now, it's not running? Perfect. Okay. Okay. That's fine. So we're going to come.
Start the server with this.
Now we're going to start the server.
We're going to well, it's an embedded server with Spring Boot. But yeah. It's...
Oh my God. Sorry. Yes, you can see things from the clipboard. Jeez. Okay. So we're going to do a Maven Spring Boot run. Spring Boot run, by the way, is typically defined in the POM XML. It has a bunch of steps that it runs through when you call that, and you can change those as you need.
Yeah, and it will compile again your code and... Oh, good news.
Okay, so we have a service. It's public. Hooray. So Sebi did this on his first run through of this workshop. I'm not going to because I don't have that kind of confidence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a preview of this service in the browser. Gosh, that is not what I wanted to do, but that's what happened. Okay.
The white error is legit. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to do it in a different tab. Okay. So we have a service running. Amazing. It doesn't have a front end, and that's why it has this white error label error page. we had the option to take that service public, which would let basically anybody on this call post to that service or add cats or do things. Like I said, I don't personally have that confidence. I don't trust people, so that's not happening on my call. Okay, so let's continue. Just to summarize, we had our cats service. And now we need to create a repository for our cats. A repository is, for lack of a better word, a construct that is pervasive when using the Spring framework. And it's really, as you can sort of see by the method signature, it's a wrapper for a JPA repository. We will return to this in the future. But it's definitely an important concept to know if you're interacting with the JPA, if you're interacting with Spring Boot, if you're doing anything that persists to a database. Reading through the documentation on that is really, really helpful.
And here you see some of the Spring magic, because we just define an interface and we specify that it will be using cat. And just by doing this, it will provide us a bunch of methods. We can just inject this repo into wherever we want in the code, and it will provide us all the persistence, all the CRUD methods. So yeah, that's some magic of and also what I said, developer experience. You know, you don't have to write all those.
Yeah, what a repository really does is it gives you the boilerplate for CRUD.
Yes, exactly.
And because writing CRUD methods is just really repetitive, it is a super useful developer experience thing to have, particularly for designing REST APIs. Because if you're designing any kind of REST API, you're almost certainly implementing all of the CRUD methods plus a few extras based on the entity that you're dealing with. Yeah. And speaking of creating REST services,
wow,
our next step is to create a controller, to create a REST service. So we're going to create something called cat controller, and I will explain that once we have created the file. Sebby and I are both very aware that cat controller is an oxymoronic
There's a typo
name.
in the file name.
Oh, thank you.
Ooh. Thank you, Tibbs.
Thank you, Tibbs. Cat controller is an oxymoronic name. Nobody can control cats. However, in Java naming conventions, particularly JPA naming conventions, this is what you would call it, because in Java, every class has a distinct responsibility, and this responsibility of this one is to sort of control the interactions with the cat model. So let's talk about this. We're importing a bunch of beans. And I think it's a really helpful thing to kind of go through step by step what these are. So the auto-wired bean is perhaps like the creme de la creme of developer experience pieces of functionality that the Spring Framework provides. What it basically does is it like makes sure. How would you explain it, Sebby?
Yeah, well, I would say it's what the Hollywood principle. That's it. It's you annotate this your service with auto write, and basically you say, hey, inject me an instance of this object or this interface into my class. So in old school, you should do new, or you should use a service registry that was from the Java Enterprise. It could be really complicated, or you should provide some configuration files, XML files. Here you say, no, auto write, just inject this this cat repository.
Give me one instance of the thing to use. Exactly. Okay, so let's talk about all of these sort of REST ones. So the first one we care about is this idea of the REST controller that is typically annotated on the class as a whole. And it basically says like, hey, this class is going to be doing some like RESTful methods over HTTP. And the rest of these, request mapping, request body, post mapping, get mapping, are specific kinds of REST methods that we can use. So let's kind of walk through cat controller. So cat controller is a REST controller. Like we said, this is a class that is responsible for doing RESTful things. The request mapping is basically the endpoint URL that we care about.
Exactly.
So the path is cats. Cats is auto-wired so that we have a cat repository available to us, which is super lovely. The post mapping, so basically post /cats, does this method. It adds a new cat.
So
the cat must have a request.
Yeah, if there's a post HTTP method coming in, it automatically will go into this method.
Yep. Similarly, if there's a get method coming into /cats, it will return as many cats as are available. That's kind of what the iterable does and what the find all method does. And some of these, I believe find all and save are standard methods that come with REST controller, correct? I might be lying to you. The important part is that the save find all methods are like standard to the Spring library, so don't worry about it too much beyond that.
It's even standard to JPA, so
yeah.
You will find those methods also in other implementations.
Okay, so let's start and stop our application real quick. And just do another little reboot. Yeah. You don't really need to do this because I believe like Tomcat's running in the background, so it should be fine, but it's a good practice. It's probably a good idea to do either way.
There are some options to have live reload, but yeah, it's for now
Okay. So I'm just going to click the plus sign over here to open myself another terminal window. So you can access the different terminal windows available to us here. We have to keep one terminal window open to let the thing run. Let's come over to this bash though, and let's start posting cats. So this is available on localhost 8080, correct?
Yes.
Okay, amazing.
It worked.
Hooray! And I believe if we come over here.
Yeah, and that you do /cats at the end.
Thank you.
We should have Scratch. Yeah.
Scratch is there. So tell us a little bit more about your cat Scratch, Sebi.
Yeah, so first about his name. Why is he called Scratch? Because my daughter, she is a fan of the programming language Scratch, where you can build applications with blocks. And in Scratch, you're using a cat in the beginning. And so we decided, hey, when we got Scratch, we decided
I love that.
Scratch.
Oh, I love that. That's so adorable.
Yeah.
Okay, so while Sebi was telling us about Scratch,
you also
I added Link. We also added Link.
His little brother. And for this one, my son was allowed to pick a name. And since he's a big Zelda fan, he decided to call him Link.
I was wondering if it was Zelda. So you'll see now that if we have curled and done a get basically to this endpoint, we see both Scratch and Link. And again, we see that here on the web UI too. Sweet.
Curling the cats.
We have curled the cats. So one thing to note here, I'm just going to come back to application properties for a second, is that we have this create-drop.
Oh yeah, really important.
Property on the method. And what that basically does is it'll actually like not persist things to the database. I realize this is a database persistence workshop. But this is actually a best practice when you're working in development because you don't want to put things into a database that you're not 100% sure of. So when you're actually ready to commit to your database, what you're going to do is use
update. Well, it will persist it in the database. It will actually go to the database. But if you stop your app and you start your app and you are on create drop, Hibernate will drop the table before starting the application.
Okay, I understand.
You see, in the end, it's a bit the same, but it actually really writes to the database.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it on update for now. And I'm going to say, let's add a new finder method. Though first off, do we have any questions from anybody in the chat?
No.
Okay, sounds good. So let's add a finder method. Let's say we want to find a specific cat by a specific ID. So that's going to take two things from us. We're going to need to have an ID specific endpoint in our cat controller. So I'm going to add that down here under get cats. And I'm going to make sure the indentation is nice because that's how I am. So let's talk about a few things here. This is a get mapping, but you'll notice that we actually have a slightly different endpoint. So where we're going to go is cat / the ID of the cat. And that's going to retrieve us a specific cat. And again, I'm going to start and stop this because I'm like that.
Yeah, and maybe we can say a few words about the ID, because the curly braces around it. So that means it's templated, and it matches if you go to the signature of your method get cat by ID. You can see here we have a pass variable. Pass variable, which is probably missing the import here.
Oh yeah, that'll be it. Because I corrected this in the README, but I don't think I corrected this in the.
Oh yeah.
We need.
The pass variable. Yeah, I should have. And that is where if you have code completion.
I know I don't have code completion available on this.
Don't worry. Let me find the. I just have to create a class on my side so I can. New file folder. Because I don't know by head the import. I should, but let me add the finder method. There we go. Oh, yeah, and the indentation is not good there. That's why. Okay. Pass variable. Okay, so let me. Where did that go? Pass variable. Oh yeah, there we go. Oh, it's the same as the. It's also under annotation, but let me paste it in the private chat here. There we go.
Apologies for not having code completion available, guys. That is.
Yeah, that's weird. That's really weird.
It is a little weird, but we're live, so we can't really troubleshoot this right.
Yeah. And you also don't have. It should have underlined in red because of the path.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I was not expecting this.
That is. Hopefully, that was the only import. I think so. Yeah. Looks like.
Let's open the browser preview again. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. And then let's come to our terminal and we will look for a specific cat.
Yeah. We need to create the cats again because
we do need to create the cats again because we were not persisting. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh geez. Let's just do both. Let's do both of the creation curls at once.
It's okay. It's one.
And then let's look for cat at ID 1. If it lets me.
Oh.
Of course not.
Just do Control C and
Control
C. I think you were asking for cat 1E.
Yep. Oh, yeah, that'll do it. Sorry, everybody. So we're also going to end the workshop right after this. There's a bit more content in the repository, but we are almost at time.
Yeah. Oh, look, it works. Oh, that's
and
nice.
We have Scratch. Amazing. So like I said, we're going to kind of start wrapping things up because we're almost at time here. So just once again, sign up for an Aiven service. It's great. The workshop repository is available to you. And you can also ask any questions you have about this workshop on the forum. What we learned today, how to persist an object in a database using JPA, specifically the Spring Boot implementation of JPA. How to create a Manage MySQL service and how to create a table using Aiven. how to build a very, very basic Spring Boot application, specifically how to create entities and tag them as such so that Spring Boot knows what to do, how to auto-wire a controller so that it has instances of all the classes it needs, a little bit about the repository idea in Spring Boot, but we didn't go too much in detail. We didn't, unfortunately, go through creating relationships between entities or writing custom queries. But if you're interested, you can actually follow along the next few steps in the Spring Hibernate Workshop repository. So take a look at that when you're ready.
Yeah. We show how to make a relationship. And also we show a bit of the JPQL, so this SQL for Java. So if you want to see how it looks like, just follow the repo. It will be there forever. Yeah. And if you have questions, we have the forum where you can come along. The whole community is there. Just pop your questions there, and we will be more than happy to help you.
Yeah.
Or even better, you can even open a pull request if you see something wrong in the repo. It could be, or you want to correct my indentation that I did wrong in the repo.
Yeah.
And I will be more than happy to merge it.
Yeah. So what do you need to do next? We have a whole bunch of content available for you on our Developer Center if you're interested in learning more about data, learning more about how to manipulate and use data in your applications. Like Sebi mentioned, if you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us in the community forums. We run workshops every single Wednesday, and you can check out what workshops are upcoming on our website, or you can join the Aiven newsletter and be informed about workshops that way. It was a pleasure to give this workshop to all of you. We would love to hear your feedback, so feel free to give us some feedback on the forum. And yeah.
It was fun too.
I think that's it. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much. And have a wonderful kind of rest of your day.
Yeah.